Hey guys, Bill again here from Quorum. Thanks again for joining today's presentation. As people are wrapping up 2022 and beginning to prepare for 2023, a lot of people review systems and look to make improvements. One of those is looking over the existing disaster recovery plan, or for even some teams, developing a disaster recovery plan for a first time. So as we prepare for the new year, we wanted to have this presentation just for food for thought for people to think about. Some of you may be customer of Quorum already, some are partners, some are just joining out of interest to learn today. And so we're going to go through the areas of, why is DR planning important? Other than buying a good backup software, what are the other components to having a good DR plan in place? And then finally, maybe just some areas that people might overlook or areas of emphasis. We're going to run through a couple of different disaster scenarios, and Gabe, who's on the line with us, is going to walk us through, how we might respond to each one. I'm just going to stay on as the monitor here. So if you have any questions at all during the presentation, feel free to type them into the chat, and I'll feed them to Gabriel Gamble, who's going to lead us through the DR planning presentation today. So thanks again for joining, and just fire away those questions as they come up.
Thanks a lot, Bill. I appreciate it. Hi, everybody. My name's Gabriel. I'm the Vice President of Technical Operations and Product here at Quorum. What we're going to discuss today is a couple of obvious slides. We're going to go through some of the findings that we've had this year on what constitutes a disaster, and then we're going to talk about how you plan for a disaster and prepare. Okay. All of the findings we've done are based on third-party reviews, articles published, technical findings that have been found from different societies and publications, and then based on what we found, we compared to what we see in our own environment, and we're pretty much on the same page as these. So this is going to be a good overview of kind of what's going on in the world right now. So the first thing is why the plan is important. And really it all comes down to the whole concept of time is money. Beyond the obvious things of personal safety and the safety of all your employees and that kind of stuff, a disaster really has an impact on how you guys can operate your business. And that time equates to the money you're going to lose by being down. The essential elements of the disaster recovery plan are pretty straightforward. Obviously, you need business criteria. And I say obviously, but it's really a misnomer. A lot of companies we see that set up their disaster recovery plan do it as an IT department in isolation. They don't really reach out to the business units and find out what their expectations or their needs are, and thus they miss the mark when it comes to having an actual disaster. They'll say a server can be down for a day or two, but the impact to the business might mean, no, that server has to be up within an hour. So sitting down with your business unit leaders, your different departments, and finding out what your business criteria are is really the first step. And it's really the most important step in setting up your disaster recovery plan. The next thing is the LAN-WAN diagram. And I say this with humility. I know a lot of IT departments don't like to build a LAN-WAN diagram, but it really is critical when you want to sit down, especially if you have a third-party company helping you set up your plan or anything else, because it gives you a visual representation of your network so you can see where any single points of failure are. And it's really important to have that visibility and to define those single points of failure so that you can make sure you have things in place to mitigate what those are. And then, of course, final is testing and success criteria. Setting up your environments. Once you know your weaknesses and the expectations, then you can decide what to test and what that means so you can have a successful plan. So the common causes of a disaster recovery are really the same as they've always been. The one difference is that cyber threats have really kind of skyrocketed up the chain to be kind of the number 2 threat, where it used to be around number 4, number 5, behind natural disasters or before natural disasters. And that change is really kind of driven by, of course, ransomware. But the number 1 issue is, as it's always been, It's user error. And the reason it's user error is because a user's impact on their environment could result in ransomware, or a guy working a backhoe by a data center could pull up a fiber line. Those are still considered user errors, even though they cause a power outage or might result in someone clicking on a link that results in ransomware. A couple of examples are a typo in 2017 took down AWS services, or a bug in an audit software took down Facebook for a couple of days in 2021. These type of things are definitely the number one cause of a disaster. Of course, number two is the cyber threats or ransomware, and they're just as important as the user error. Cyber threats are really becoming on their way to be the number one reason that people have an outage, and it is definitely the most scary because your data is still there, you just can't get to it. Oh, I did want to point out here, a lot of ransomware strikes are happening to customers now multiple times. So they'll pay it, they'll get their data back, and then they'll get hit again and they'll have to pay more. So 80% of companies that were hit with ransomware were hit again, and 60% of those had to pay more, or 70% of those had to pay more. That's a scary thought, because that means that whatever problem you had before hasn't been mitigated, or they found another way to get in. So whether that's training or whatever is attacking you, having a good disaster recovery plan to mitigate the paying of ransomware is really important.
And how do people avoid just paying the ransomware? Or maybe you're getting into that.
Yeah, we'll get into that. But the number one way is to have a good disaster recovery plan and backup and recovery policy for sure. Because it's the last line of defense, right? You can have your firewalls, you can have your antivirus software, your endpoint protections, all of these things. But if someone makes that critical mistake, you can still get infected. So, trainings and all that stuff are great, but having a good disaster recovery plan is really your last line of defense.
Thank you.
Yeah, so power outages are really number 3 on the list. And this was surprising to me. I expected them to be lower on the list, to be honest. But because of so many different things going on in the nation and in the world right now, power outages have kind of moved up to be a little more critical than they were before. So I just wanted to point out, the average cost of a 3-minute outage is $2,000. So if you lose power for $2,000, the average cost to a company is $2,100. And then, of course, not to say it's horrible, but last on our list is the natural disasters. And the reason I want to talk about this for a second, I just want to point out something that is important for everyone to recognize. So in 2022, Forbes lists that there were 9 natural disasters. Now, the reason this is such a big number is because for decades and decades and decades, the world had 7 natural disasters a year, and it was pretty rhythmic. You'd have a tornado, you'd have a flood, you'd have a hurricane come through, and it was pretty notable. But in the last 5 years, that number has moved from 7 up to 9. So now on average, we have 9 natural disasters a year. And so the number of natural disasters is going up, and the cost of them is also going up. $268 billion in natural disasters happened in 2022. That is epic. It's far above what it's been in the past. And so I wanted to take a minute to point that out to everybody, that we always think it's lowest on the list, it's going to have the least impact. You're right, it's the least common, but when it hits you, it's the most damage. So be aware of that. So how to prepare. And this is going to kind of get into the meat of our discussion today. The first thing you want to do is build a checklist. And that checklist is going to and I'm going to go through a generic checklist that we have, but that checklist is going to really define what your disaster recovery plan, your business continuity plan is going to look like. What's important to you as a company. What's important to a hospital might not be important to a construction company, right? So building your checklist on how it affects your company is definitely your first step. The second step is to understand what your activation triggers are. And this is a critical juncture, because people say, well, a server goes down, we got to fix it. Yes, but an activation trigger for you to declare it's a disaster might be a server's down for a week. It depends on your company and how you guys operate, versus, a server going down at a bank is immediate, right? It's got to be back up. If I can't do transactions, the whole company comes to a stop. So defining who and how you'll work is number 3. So when you're setting up a disaster recovery plan or a business continuity plan, the most important thing to know is how to respond, not what steps you're going to do, but how you respond. And so you need to define who the owners are of different processes, who's their backup if they're out of the office. How are you going to communicate with your users or with your customers? These are steps that definitely need business input, right? It's not an IT discussion. This is a business discussion on how you respond to these things. Do you set up a 1-800 number for your employees to call into so that they can find out what next steps are? Do you have some kind of maybe a chat mechanism like Teams or Slack that you're going to communicate on and have a special channel for? These are the ways that these are the things you need to define ahead of time so that you can train and so you can notify all your employees and or customers on how you will react if you declare a disaster. Another thing to note is things like remote access. Who's going to be able to do what from where? Are you going to have VPN connections? Are you going to have people work from a different office? Are you just going to close specific offices? These are all things you want to define ahead of time, and they'll be based on the scenario on how you'll react. Then the next step is to build a minimum of 5 scenarios. You really want at least 5 different ways that a disaster can happen in your environment, whether it's a single server failure, a multi-server failure, a site failure, a natural disaster, a plague, or a pandemic where we got to work from home. These are all really disaster scenarios that we have to account for. And so you want to build those scenarios, and then you want to test those scenarios. You want to go through and say, okay, we're going to take a Saturday and we're going to test a pandemic scenario, and we're going to make sure everyone can connect from home, their applications work, they have enough bandwidth, blah, 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 so that you know how to react in a disaster. I'm going to get into kind of an example checklist. So the next 2 or 3 slides kind of go through an example checklist. So the first one is a pre-planning checklist. So this is what you're going to go through and kind of make sure you understand or have a handle on before you build your disaster recovery plan. So a disaster recovery plan typically is dependent on also having a business continuity plan. So you know how you're going to treat employees, treat users, and all that stuff. They are very interrelated documents, but they are different. And so having BCP planning first really helps define how your DR plan will work. The next thing is outdated, but it's a call tree. Have a way to contact people. What if it's your digital phone system that's down and you don't have everyone's cell phone on hand? What if it's your chat mechanism like Slack is down and you have no way to call your users that are now working from home? These type of things are important. And I know I say them and everyone goes, well, I have them here, I have them there. Great. Make sure you have access to all of those different ways and have multiple ways to get to those lists. Define your roles. And it's really important to clearly define your roles. Who's going to handle communication? If they're on vacation, who's their backup? If someone's on a plane, how are you going to handle communicating with everyone else, right? So you got to have clear roles for both primary and backup people for each different set of tasks that you're going to have as part of your disaster recovery plan. Critical assets to be retrieved. You might have a situation where you had a flood in the building, but your servers are on the 2nd floor, but they have no power. Maybe you have a means to go into that 2nd floor and physically remove specific servers, or maybe you have backup tapes in the trunk of your car that you need to go get out. whatever it is, you want to make sure that you have those critical assets listed, denoted, and a way to retrieve them for your different scenarios. Another, it seems easy but really critical thing is make copies of your BCP plan for all your managers. They should have a printed copy of it. And I know that's a pain, and I know it's a lot to manage and update, but if you've lost internet access because you had a tornado come through your town and you need to figure out how to start your BCP plan, but you have no way to get online, this is one way to do it. You got to have it printed out. Alternative sites to meet and work, having those defined and planned. And we've come a long way, obviously, with the pandemic we just went through on how we handle and do that. So a lot of people, it's going to be second nature to, but it should be defined and written down. Public relation policies, if you got hit with ransomware and it's affecting customer data, you might need a way to communicate with news and media outlets or customers on how you're going to handle that. And so having that defined and having the people that you know are going to be responsible for those roles is critical. A reporting strategy to document and ensure consistent communication. What I see a lot of people do is they have a disaster recovery channel in Slack or Teams or whatever your collaboration tool is. That's never ever used unless you have a disaster, and then all the communication goes in there and it just becomes a dumping ground for everything you do. Told Bob to call, PG&E, right, or the electric company. I told Jim to start up the servers or whatever it was, but it just becomes a log of all the communication things you've done so that after the fact, you can come back and see what worked and what didn't and update your plans. And again, I say LAN-WAN diagrams are critical. They tell you where your single points of failure are. They tell you where things need to go in a disaster scenario. Having both a DR LAN diagram and a LAN-WAN diagram is a critical cog in any plan that you design. Workflows before and after hours. So most disasters don't happen during the workday. They happen on a weekend, they happen at night, they happen when you least expect it. And so planning how you're going to handle, if those are the situations, how you're going to communicate is just as important as planning when you're in the office. Customer training. Customer training is vital. Training in any way regarding disaster recovery is so vital. Knowing how to avoid getting ransomware, knowing how to react when you get ransomware, knowing how to question a guy coming in your office with a Dell shirt on who wants to get into your server room, right? These are critical things that you should hold trainings on and discuss with your employees so they know how to make sure your environment is secure, your data is secure, and your company can work. And then those same trainings have to apply to how to react in a disaster. Regular DR planning meetings and DR tests are vital. I recommend having a backup software that you can do testing on at a minimum daily, weekly, monthly basis so that you have peace of mind that if you have a disaster, you can recover. So those were the general tasks. Now we're going to talk about the management tasks. So you're going to confirm your activation triggers, checklist. Hey, yep, this is a disaster. You're going to start your call tree. Hey, I'm going to let all the other leaders of each process know what's going on. My management team, how do I initiate any calls? How do I communicate with my customers? I'm going to decide where and who my command center is. Again, it's really common to use a channel in Slack for that nowadays. I'm going to let every employee know what the plan is. Now, I call that the call tree, but it might be an email to everybody if email is up and running. It might be a group text. It might be a lot of different things, but you've got to let everyone know what the plan is. And you've got to make sure that that communication is clear and it's constant, right? It's always coming out. Then you start beginning your recovery strategy. Establish where your employees are going to work from, working from home, working from a different office, going to a DR site, whatever that's going to be. And then you're going to complete your status reports on a regular basis to document your recovery. And then you begin actually recovering servers and technology and that kind of stuff. And you'll notice your DR recovery is the last step. All of those top steps are how do I communicate? How do I let people know what's happening? Obviously, single server disasters are a lot easier to follow through with this, but a full site disaster, a tornado coming through or whatever, this becomes a critical cog in knowing how to handle this. So I'm going to talk a little bit now about Quorum and our product. Our product is a disaster recovery as a service product. So we take all your servers, be they physical or virtual, and we protect them on an appliance that can replicate to the cloud, or an appliance to appliance, or directly to the cloud. We have different ways to manage that. But in any case, any way we do it, we can back up your servers either via an agent, or we have agentless for VMware, what we call VIP, that can back up at the VM level and be able to recover directly back to your VM hosts. So we have all of these ways to recover. We can recover on the appliance. We can recover in the cloud. We have instant recovery, file level recovery, bare metal recovery, archiving, reporting. And because we've built all of this infrastructure, allowing you to build a disaster plan that you can test on a regular basis is also built into the solution. So you can actually bring up your entire environment on what we call the test network and do a full DR test without affecting your production environment at all. This gives you A, peace of mind, but B, you can go through those scenarios a lot faster where you don't have to take a full Saturday to do a full test. And then this gets into a little bit of the dynamics of it. It's a busy slide, but kind of give you an idea. If you start in the top left corner, your servers, be they virtual machines, physical machines, you're connected to storage, however that works in your environment, you can back them up to a local device, which can then replicate those virtual machines and be able to boot and run all of those virtual machines or physical machines in your environment. So we can actually take your physical server that failed, let's say it's an Exchange server, bring it up as a virtual machine on the appliance. It'll start up with the same IP, the same everything, and allow you to work in a disaster scenario where that server went down, and then recover back to new hardware once it gets on site. We can then take all the data off of the local appliance and we can replicate it either to a remote appliance if you have a second location, or directly to Quorum's cloud. We have an East and a West Coast data center that is set up to provide full disaster recovery capabilities. Each customer has their own virtual firewall, their own data, servers, and everything set up to mimic what they had in production. So it can come up with the same IPs, the same subnets, the same DMZs, so forth and so on. So you can build your entire cloud infrastructure or your entire site infrastructure in the cloud and boot it instantly. I mean, it's the time it takes to boot. All the servers are ready to run, even from the cloud. So any way you want to kind of cut it, whether you're going directly to cloud or a local appliance to cloud, you can get up and running very quickly. And then if you look at top center, you see the little laptop. You can create a VPN connection directly to the cloud, so all your users can get back up and running. And there's lots of variations that we can do, lots of different ways we can connect to the cloud and provide that connection for recovery capabilities. So I recommend that you reach out to your sales rep and talk to them about that. But we can help build that disaster recovery plan in the most easy, straightforward way possible. So with that, I'm going to kind of open it up to questions. Bill, I'm going to kind of hand it back over to you. Let me know if you have any questions, and we'll go from there.
Sure. One question was just, how should someone prepare, and you were just talking about a little bit, but for an extended outage, maybe locally, or if they're failing over in the cloud?
Well, the first thing I would do to prepare is to make sure that your cloud solution, A, has the bandwidth, B, has no ingress and egress cost to you. So once you're up in the cloud and running, there's no additional cost to that. You want something that's going to be able to run for an extended period of time, because if you lost a site, let's say you had a fire in your building and the sprinklers went off and basically cooked all your servers. Well, the lead time for server hardware right now is hurting. It's like 2 months. If you had to run in the cloud for 2 months, that might be extensively expensive for you. So having a solution that's ready to run in the cloud that doesn't cost anything extra to run is probably a critical path that I would look at. And then making sure that your vendor, whoever you're working with, can then build out a way to locally recover when that hardware arrives. Recovering 10 terabytes across your WAN link is probably going to be pretty painful. So having a way to seed and ship boxes to you locally to recover would be a critical path that I would make sure I consider.
Thank you. And someone had just asked if they'd like to receive more information. I'll follow up with each person afterwards just to send you an email. And if you would like to learn more about a DR plan or quorum specifically, that's a good place to kick it off. And for the person who just messaged me, I'll follow up with you directly. Another question we had was, and I'm trying to get some clarification on this, Gabe, but are there any integration or tools that Quorum connects with?
The Quorum has the means to connect with a lot of different stuff. All of our alerting and reporting is either SNMP or email based. So that can feed into a lot of tools like we use. We have a real good connection with Backup Radar, and we kind of tailored our emails to work with the way Backup Radar works. For example, because a lot of MSPs are using Backup Radar to monitor all their customers. So we do that a lot of times. But we're pretty flexible on how we can connect because we have those mechanisms at hand. And sorry, just on a side note, because I know you're asking clarification, if that kind of connectivity is what you're talking about, the other way we connect is we do use what we call Quorum VIP, which is the VMware integrated protection. And we actually talk to vCenter and communicate with it so that we're backing up the servers off of vCenter directly, or the vSphere directly to our appliances, so that if they need to recover, they can recover from the appliance, or we can directly mount back an NFS share to those ESX boxes and bring up the servers directly. So that's another integration that we have.
And other integrations that I can think of is there's a specific integration with SQL that Quorum has that can provide sub 30-second RPO, which is a special requirement for some of our clients. And also we integrate with most cloud hosted applications, whether that's like Office 365, the G Suite, Salesforce, anything like that.
Correct. On all of those counts. Integration is such a broad term, but yes, we do all of those things as well.
All right, we got one more here. Let's see. Is my environment, it's asking, I guess, where the data centers are located for Quorum's private cloud.
Oh, that's a great question. We have one data center up in San Jose, and then we have one in New York. So we're East and West Coast based. We also have a third data center technically in the UK, but most American companies want to back up into America. So East and West colos are there for that. If you have anyone in Europe, they would go to the UK.
And most people just replicate to one data center, and the one that's not geographically close to them. Is that correct?
Yeah, like if you're in San Jose, then yeah, I would recommend not replicating to San Jose. But if you were outside of just that Bay Area, San Jose would probably be the primary place we would put your data, just because that is the most robust data center that we have. Anywhere else, we would probably go East Coast.
And that's for US people, but if you're in Canada or Europe or Middle East or Australia, there'd be different locations, like you said.
Yeah, we have different solutions for different locations outside the US.
Cool. And someone must have liked your presentation that you put together, because they asked for a copy of it, which I'm happy to send out after this. Absolutely. And like Gabe said, if you'd like to learn more about Quorum, or if you just want to ask some questions about DR planning, be sure to reach out to us and we can connect you to an engineer.
Cool. Well, thanks a lot, Bill. I appreciate it. And everyone that joined today, I appreciate your time. As Bill said, if you have any questions, please reach out, and happy to supply this information. We also have what we call the DR Blueprint, which is kind of a generic document that talks about some of those checklist items that we can hand out to you if you reach out to Bill.
Great. Thanks, Gabe. Thanks, everyone. Thanks for the great questions. And again, we'll follow up with you after the presentation. If we didn't get to your question, or you thought of one that you didn't get a chance to ask, you can let us know then. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.